So fundamentally, weak acids and bases act as buffers which do not dissociate completely into respective ions. An example of buffer is bicarbonic acid, which is the undissociated acid, and it will partly dissociate into its ions, that is hydrogen ions and the bicarbonate ions. So this buffer exists both as undissociated acid as well as in the form of dissociated ions. So let's see an example how this bicarbonic acid and its ions will act as buffer. So suppose there is addition of a strong acid which we are considering HCl as a strong acid, which dissociates into hydrogen ions and chloride ions, and this is our buffer in undissociated form as well as in its dissociated ions form. So with the addition of the acid, what will happen that hydrogen ions of the acid will combine with the bicarbonate ions of the buffer, and the reaction can proceed in the reverse direction, forming the undissociated acid. So this will prevent the change in pH caused by the addition of the acid. On the other hand, if there is addition of a strong base, there will be this release of the sodium ions and hydroxyl ions, and H2CO3 will combine with the hydroxyl ions and the reaction will proceed towards the other side, causing the release of the components. So here basically there will be formation of water. So fundamentally what we are saying is that in a buffer, the undissociated acid acts as a proton donor, while the dissociated ions, especially the conjugate base, acts as a proton acceptor. So buffer is basically the combination of the undissociated acid and the proton acceptor, that is the conjugate base of this acid. Now it has to act in both the directions. That means when acid is added, the reaction should proceed in backward direction, and when a base is added, reaction should proceed in the forward direction. So a buffer should handle pH changes on either side effectively and maybe equally, isn't it? So for that we want that the concentration of this proton donor and the proton acceptor should be equal. But is it so? Are the proton donor and proton acceptors in equal concentration? See, from beginning we are saying that the buffer dissociates partly, but how much partly? Is it the dissociation, is it 50%? If it is 50%, then obviously the undissociated acid and the dissociated ions will be in equal concentration. But that we don't know. So that is governed by the characteristic of the buffer, that is how much it is dissociating, and that will define that how effective the buffer is. Now this characteristic of the buffer is determined by what is known as dissociation constant or equilibrium constant. To understand this, let's take an example of a buffer. So this is the undissociated form of the buffer, and which partly dissociates into its ions, that is the hydrogen ions and its conjugate base. Now dissociation constant is defined as the concentration of the dissociated ions divided by the concentration of the undissociated acid. So this Ka is the dissociation constant, and this is the symbol by which we represent it. Now if we take log on both sides, that is minus log Ka is equal to minus log the concentration of the dissociated ions divided by the concentration of the undissociated ions. If you see, we have put minus log hydrogen ions as pH. So similarly, this minus log Ka we can write as pKa. So pKa is equal to minus log of the dissociated ions divided by the concentration of the undissociated acid. Now if we solve for hydrogen ions in the same equation, what we will get is Henderson-Hasselbalch equation. So this is our dissociation constant, and this is the equation for the dissociation constant. Let us solve for hydrogen ions in this equation. So these components will move towards the other side. So this will become the denominator on the other side, and the undissociated acid will go to the numerator of the other side. And now if we take minus logarithm of both the sides, what we get is this minus log Ka. If you remember what we said, it is pKa, and this minus log H plus is pH. So what we get is pKa, and you see here we have changed the sign, so it becomes pKa plus log, and when we change the sign of the log, we have to change the numerator and denominator, we just have to invert it. So it becomes pKa plus log the conjugate base divided by the undissociated acid is equal to pH, because this minus log H plus N is the pH. So this equation which we are seeing is the Henderson-Hasselbalch equation. Now we have said that buffer is most effective in equal concentration when the concentration of the conjugate base is equal to the concentration of the undissociated acid. So that means we can write the equation as pK plus log 1 is equal to pH, because if the concentrations are equal, they will divide and it will become as plus log 1. And since log 1 is equal to 0, we can write the equation like this, or pK is equal to pH. So in short, we can say that buffer is most effective in either direction when pK of the buffer is equal to the pH of the solution in which it is acting. So is it true for physiological buffers?